Facebook, Archery Group X. I'm a new bow hunter. I don't know what arrows to pick. Which ones are the best? Send. Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. If you've never been here before, my name is Trent and I appreciate you coming to watch this video. If you have been here before, I appreciate you coming back. We're going to talk about arrow selection as a new bow hunter today. And it's going to be part of my new to bow hunting series. And what really prompted me to make this series is I see a lot of guys ask questions online about what equipment they should pick as a new bow hunter, and they get a lot of really biased responses. In my opinion, those biased responses don't help educate you on how to pick the best equipment for you. They just shove products down your throat. So I'm going to give you unbiased information to help educate you on how to select equipment. Now when it comes to arrow selection, I have a process, and usually my process starts with selecting the diameter of arrow that I'm after, depending on the application. Now I'm primarily a bow hunter. I occasionally shoot some 3D, but I don't compete at a high level. So for me, there's really 3 diameter options. Now when we're talking about arrow diameter, we're talking about the inner diameter of the carbon shaft. That's just how they're measured. So your first option is a standard diameter arrow, and these are 0.246 or a 0.245 diameter. Your next option is small diameter, and these are 0.204 and 0.203. And your last option is small or micro diameter, and these are 0.166 and 0.165. Now each of these arrows has their own pros and their own cons, and I'll go through those with you real quick. The standard diameter arrow is kind of, well, it's standard. That's how it gets its name. These are pretty much available anywhere, which is a big plus. I mean, you can go into even Walmarts and stuff and get a standard diameter arrow, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're plentiful, they're cheap. Sometimes you can pick up a dozen for as low as $40, and those arrows are going to be fine. The biggest downside to these is they're not always the most durable. Sometimes the thickness of the carbon wall on the arrow shaft is not very high, so they aren't very durable. Another downside is if you're shooting long distances or you're shooting somewhere that's really windy, particularly some places out west, a standard diameter is going to be more susceptible to wind drag, which basically means which basically means as you shoot, the wind is affecting how the arrow is flying through the air. Another real positive of these, if you ever get down the road of building your own arrows, is that it's really easy to find inserts and nocks that fit them. There's multiple choices for both regular nocks and lighted nocks, and all different kinds of insert choices. Your next option is the small diameter, and this is the option that I personally choose. Now, a small diameter arrow, it's kind of a perfect mix in my opinion between the micro diameter and the standard. Obviously it's bigger than a micro and it's smaller than a standard, and the smaller than a standard is going to help it with wind drift some when you're shooting further distances or in windy conditions. It's also going to aid in penetration because there's less surface area on the shaft when you're shooting through an animal. Those are both things I really like. Components, lighted nocks, regular nocks, inserts, those are both still pretty plentiful. You can have several options depending on how you want to build your arrows if you go that route. They're fairly easy to fletch. Not as easy as the standard, but they are still easier than the micros. So again, if you're building arrows, that's nice. The biggest downside to these over a standard diameter is they're more expensive. Then there's a micro diameter. Micro diameters are what I shot for a really long time. And the reason I steered away from these is just because of component selection. There's not a whole lot of options for lighted nocks and inserts that give you the wide array of, well, options. It gives you the ability to truly customize your build. They do, however, perform the best under windy conditions and distance conditions. The smaller diameter and less surface area keeps them from being affected by the wind as much. They also penetrate better than the other options because of their lower surface area. These also tend to be the most expensive options. Even when you get down to the base model of micro diameter all the way up to the top, these usually are the most expensive, so keep that in mind. When selecting arrows, the first thing I'd say is shop to your budget. I would rather see you spend really good money on a rest and a release over spending really good money on arrows, because the fact of the matter is a $40 half dozen of standard diameter arrows can kill just as effectively as a $350 dozen, half dozen, or dozen of micro diameter arrows. You just have to know your abilities. when it comes time. So after we know what diameter we're choosing, we're going to look at arrow spine. Now, I'm talking particularly for compound bow shooters here. I'm dabbling in recurve. I'm not an expert by any means, and I'm still learning and figuring that out. But for a compound bow shooter, most every company has available a spine chart. And you can find those via Google, via their website, really anywhere like that. And what it's going to do is it's going to show your draw length on one side and your draw weight on the other side, and you're just going to connect the dots and it's going to tell you what spine you need. Now this is not always foolproof. If you're shooting a bow that has a more aggressive draw cycle, considered a speed bow, that may not be, especially if you're like right on a line of say 300 and 350, you may want to go with the 300 spine because you're shooting a more aggressive bow. If you're shooting a more relaxed bow, you can go with the 350. But really those spine charts are the best way to start. And usually, in my experience at least, every time I've used a spine chart in the past, before I really dug into building arrows, they worked out fine. I could tune the bow to the arrow with no issue at all. So I recommend a spine chart. After that, for me, comes the brand of arrow. And I've found, after shooting numerous brands, and I've shot everything from Victory, Gold Tip, Easton, Black Eagle, I've shot a ton of options. I've found that pretty much everything is comparable. I've never shot an arrow or used an arrow that came from a reputable company and thought, wow, X company's so much better than this one. So really what I recommend when you're choosing company is choose what's easily available to you. If you're ordering online, obviously that gives you more options. Choose something that aligns with what you want. You know, some people are very particular about US made, and if you want that, you're going to want Easton. And then if you're building arrows, try to understand the depth of what you're going to achieve in that arrow build and go that direction. For example, last year I wanted to build what's called a high front of center setup. And in order to do that, you need an arrow that's got a low grains per inch weight. And Victory fit the bill best for that. So arrow brand, just like I said, pick what's easily available to you. If you're ordering online, just pick something that you like. Let's talk about grains per inch for a minute though. If you're just starting out and you're going to go into a shop and you're going to have them cut arrows down and build them for you, I would recommend you ask for something that is at minimum 9.5 grains per inch if you're hunting. If you're shooting targets, the GPI doesn't really matter. If you're just going to shoot paper or shoot a target in your backyard for a while, the grains per inch or GPI, it doesn't much matter. But if you're going to hunt, I would at minimum ask them to make sure that the arrows you're picking or the arrows they're helping you pick are a 9.5 GPI. If you're ordering online, that information should be very easily available when you scroll through the specifications of the arrow. If it's not, I would honestly look at a different arrow. Now the reason you want this is because a heavy arrow, in my opinion, is always going to perform superior to a lighter arrow. And in a hunting scenario, again in my opinion, the most important thing is that you have a full pass through and you're getting 2 holes, especially if you're new to it and starting out. You're getting 2 holes through that animal to help them bleed. It's going to be easier to find because they're going to have a better blood trail in almost all circumstances. So we've covered diameter, we've covered spine, we've covered grains per inch, we've covered brands. Let's talk about lighted nocks a little bit. Now, for a long time, and I remember this from specifically around 7-ish years ago, maybe a little bit before that, lighted nocks were a big controversy. Matter of fact, there was a lot of states that didn't allow lighted nocks, especially out west. They felt it was cheating. I personally have always looked at lighted nocks as a tool to help find your arrow after the shot, as a tool to help you understand and know where you hit the animal that you were shooting at. And in my particular circumstance, I film my hunts, so it's a really great filming tool because it's cool to be able to see the arrow's flight. So in my opinion, I think there's not really any reason if you're hunting to not have a lighted nock. And this is coming from a guy who, well, I'll put it this way. There's a crowd of bow hunters called the high FOC crowd, and they're going to try to push you to put every weight you can up front and take everything away from the back. And that is really good in theory. That's what I try to do, but I still think there's certain sacrifices you make for that front of center that are worth it, and a lighted nock is that. Now, in my opinion, there's really 3 good brands of lighted nocks out there. There's the Fire Nock, there's the Luminock, and there's the Nocturnal. The Nocturnal are generally going to be the ones you find in most places. They're also the cheapest of the 3. They work fine. I, by all means, use them. Matter of fact, I did a lighted nock test last year, and the Nocturnal won out. The next is the Luminock. They were the originator, if I'm not mistaken. They were the first people to do lighted nocks. They are extremely bright. Now, they can be a little bit more difficult to use than the Nocturnals and the Fire Nocks, but that trade-off is in their brightness. Matter of fact, the brightest of the 3. Fire Nock is hands down the most expensive. Fire Nock is what I use. I initially started using Fire Nock because I bought them for that test, and they were the most expensive. But what I found is Fire Nock has a ton of customability options for a wide array of anything you need it for. As I sit here editing this video, I realized that the camera I have split the video into 2 pieces, and I accidentally deleted the second piece off the camera. Fortunately, I've already said everything that I really needed to say, so I just have this for an ending. If you have any questions or comments, drop them below. I'll do my best to get to them and answer them. And if I can't find an answer, I'll try to do the research to find the answer for you. As always, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.